I'm Ashley Michaels, and this is Colorado Point of View. Colorado still dealing with massive wildfires this week. Thousands of acres are burning west of the Continental Divide, including a new fire that sparked up over the weekend in Eagle County called the Derby Fire. Coloradans were forced to leave their homes and head for safety as federal, state, and local resources were deployed to those fire lines. Much of the fire activity this week happening in Colorado's 2nd Congressional District. Here to talk about that and a whole lot more, we have Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's get started with these fires. Now, there was some concern coming into this summer that cuts to federal resources may have been a detriment to fighting fires this summer, especially here in Colorado. I just want to get your perspective. Are we getting the resources we need right now to fight these fires?
Well, first, great to be with you. Certainly that is still a concern with respect to the cuts that were made at the federal level earlier this year. But I would say that right now our firefighters and the incident command teams are doing Herculean work in battling the flames on these Western Slope fires that you described, many of which are in the 2nd Congressional District, others are in the 3rd Congressional District. Aerial resources have been brought to bear, including the C-130s that are based at Peterson Space Force Base. Republican Congressman Jeff Crank and I have been working to try to increase the resources there, additional C-130s that can be deployed on these fires, particularly just given that they're metastasizing very, very quickly, the fires, both because of the mega drought and the really warm temperatures. So I was just yesterday on the Western Slope in Rio Blanco County and Routt County, had a chance to visit Incident Command, be able to see up close the incredible work that they are doing. These wildland firefighters, it's just nothing short of amazing, their ability to work these fires very, very quickly, and they're risking, a lot, including their own lives, doing that work. So we owe them a debt of gratitude.
I know you've spent a lot of time championing for wildland firefighters and getting resources. You said you just were out there. What additional resources do you think places in Colorado and the western half of the United States need as we start seeing more of these big fires again?
Well, I would say right now the system, it's a lot of triage, right? Because as these fires begin to get contained, of course, those hotshot crews are then dispersed to other fires. And so the Croshow fire is an example, the Rio Blanco and Western Routt County fire that I had a chance to visit with the Incident Command team yesterday, had a number of hotshot crews from across the country that were working that fire. And now, of course, as they've made a lot of progress and thanks to their really brave efforts, protected constituents of mine in Phippsburg and Yampa and elsewhere, they're able to now deploy those forces in other fires, including the Derby fire, which you just mentioned, which has really exploded over the course of the last 72 hours. Essentially every night it's doubling or tripling in size. Very rugged terrain in western Eagle County, very difficult terrain for our wildland firefighters. So in my view, what we need to do is to make progress in terms of compensation at the federal level. I've led an effort for many years, as you know. These folks are really just doing Herculean work, and they're, in my view, poorly compensated.
Let's talk about how people are impacted by some of these natural disasters. So you wrote on social media this week reminding us it's been 5 years since the Cameron Peak and the East Troublesome fires. It's been 4 years since the Marshall Fire. I mean, all of these were within your district. As you look at where we are in recovery, and especially as we look forward to a future that may not have FEMA available in the same way that we've seen it before, what do you think has worked in terms of recovery, and what do you think needs to be done differently? Well,
first, I would say it's a credit to the local officials, state leaders, and community leaders who really came together in the aftermath of those fires that you just mentioned. I had a chance to be in Red Feather Lakes and Rustic and northern Larimer County to commemorate the 5-year anniversary of the Cameron Peak Fire, which of course is the largest fire in the history of our state. The Lee Fire, as you now know, on the Western Slope is poised to become the 4th largest in our state here in short order. And the communities really came together. It's the Colorado way. I mean, folks coming together, working together, neighbors helping neighbors. Of course, FEMA had a very, very large role to play. There were lessons learned in the last 5 years around red tape and the need to, to achieve better efficiencies within FEMA to get those resources to people. But at the end of the day, the federal government has a very important role to play, and I'm deeply concerned that the Trump administration's current approach to FEMA and the administration of FEMA and the implementation of grant programs and the like is deeply dangerous for communities like the communities I represent that are so often besieged by wildfires, flash floods, and other natural disasters.
I want to pivot. Let's talk about another initiative that you're working on right now, and it's called the End Corruption Now. Now, this is a package of bills designed to keep elected officials from profiting off of their positions. Maybe you can explain it a little bit more for us. And are you seeing corruption in Washington that sparked these ideas?
Yeah, well, you described it well. I mean, I would just say, taking a step back, I think folks across our country, and in particular young people, folks in my generation, millennials, younger folks, have a very jaded view of our political system. They view that system as broken and become very cynical about our politics, and one cannot blame them. And I think a big part of it is the corruption that is endemic in Washington, D.C. For too long, it's calcified, and frankly, in both parties. And in my view, I think the Congress ought to take steps to reform some of our ethics laws to restore trust in our government, not just for young folks, but American citizens and across the political spectrum. And none of these ideas are that controversial. And so we've introduced a series of bills with a number of other members of Congress, kind of mostly young kind of reformers who are new to the Congress, to try to bring some semblance of ethics back to Washington, D.C. They're all very straightforward, banning members of Congress from trading stocks. Most Americans I speak to, again, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you don't believe that members of Congress should be acting in the best interests of their stock portfolios. They should be acting in the best interests of the American people. And so taking that simple step, in my view, would do a lot in terms of restoring the trust and confidence in our system. And there are a wide variety of other examples that are all part of this package of bills. So we're pushing really hard and trying to make the case to our colleagues on both sides of the aisle that this is a prudent way forward to reforming government.
Why bring this up now? Does it have anything to do with the current administration?
Well, certainly this administration has turbocharged the corruption that I described that's kind of become pervasive in Washington, D.C. But again, the truth is parts of this package are bills that I've been pushing for a long time. Back when we first introduced our legislation to ban members of Congress from trading stocks 4 years ago, there were maybe a handful, 2 or 3 members of Congress who were willing to kind of join that effort. It's now become, much more popular, and a lot more members of Congress are, supporting that effort, which is great. And so this is just the continuation of pre-existing efforts that we've been fighting for years, and it feels like we're finally turning the corner here. And it is in part because the American people, I think, are just so outraged. But yes, unquestionably, when the President of the United States is accepting $400 million jets from foreign countries, that things aren't on the level in Washington and that we've got to make a change.
Now, you guys have been on recess from Congress over the last few weeks. That's why you've been back here in Colorado. You're set to go back pretty soon. And one of the big items on the to-do list is going to be the federal budget. Now, just to be clear, this is not the same budget talks you guys have been having over the last couple of months, the big, beautiful bill that we've talked about over and over. Tell me what you're expecting as you head into these next budget talks, and are we going to see more cuts?
Yeah, so a couple things. First, I'd say with respect to the recess, it's a bit of a misnomer just because, I've been home, as you mentioned, for the last couple of weeks. I have a district that is larger than 9 states, bigger than Maryland and New Jersey, huge district, Western Slope, suburban, urban areas. So we've been on the road. We've done 15 town halls this year, which is more town halls than most members of Congress. And as I mentioned, was just in, I think, 5 different counties yesterday. So we're on the road hearing from constituents. And of course, one of the topics that has come up, including at our town hall yesterday with Senator Bennett in Routt County, was, of course, the budget and the potential government shutdown here in the next 7 to 8 weeks, which, of course, is going to be a very important item for the Congress to consider as we return. In my view, I think Republicans, tragically, unfortunately, have been engaged in a slow motion government shutdown over the course of the last 8 months, where they are gutting these agencies, core agencies. You mentioned FEMA, the Department of the Interior, the Forest Service. And these are the folks that were working and are working these fires right now in western Colorado, whom I had a chance to visit with just yesterday. And I think it's incumbent upon my colleagues on their side of the aisle to step up, not capitulate to the president's demands, and instead work with us in good faith to actually fund these agencies. And insofar as they're willing to do that, then I think there's the potential, for an accord to be reached. But at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon them, I think, to come to the table.
What do you think are some of the biggest things that us here in Colorado should be watching for as you guys do engage in those negotiations on the budget over the next several weeks?
Yeah, I think I would say 2 things. One, with respect to the federal agencies, the land management agencies, BLM, Forest Service, can we find a way to restore these draconian cuts? The federal labs, we're fighting to protect NOAA and NIST and NREL, so many of these scientific labs that are the crown jewels of the laboratory federal system. And then I would say, secondly, with respect to healthcare, the premium tax credits for the Affordable Care Act, if those are not extended, I believe that the exchanges could very well collapse in different parts of our state, especially in rural parts of the state that I represent. And so we've got to get those extended, and I think that's going to be a big part of the negotiation.
Yeah, a lot of work, a lot to talk about over the next several weeks. Thank you for coming on and having a conversation. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, of course.
Well, after the break, our analysts will be joining us here in studio as we take a closer look at the president's new push to end voting by mail. Welcome back. This week, President Trump announced he plans to change the way Coloradans and others across the country vote. Take a listen.
Are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots. We're going to start with an executive order that's being written right now by the best lawyers in the country to end mail-in ballots.
Here in Colorado, we've had mail-in ballots since 2013. No, not everybody turns in their ballot by mail. The concept is very popular. Our team learned that in Colorado, 92% of registered Republicans who voted in last year's presidential primary filled out the ballot that was mailed to them. So let's bring in our analysts to talk a little bit more about it. On the Democratic side, we have senior presidential and gubernatorial advisor Andy Boyan. And on the Republican side, we have the president of Advance Colorado, Michael Fields. Okay, so he said that mail-in ballots are essentially the only way that Democrats can get elected, but Trump has won the presidency twice under this system. Michael, I'll start with you. Why would he want to get rid of this?
I think that really what he said, that he thinks that this is, a disadvantage to Republicans. I do think, 43% of people across the country used mail-in ballots this last time, and he won. He won the electoral and the popular vote. I think the clear thing in here is that states are in charge of elections. There is some oversight, some process for Congress. They have a limited role in it, but the president really has no role in it. And so I think, he can pass an executive order on it. It doesn't mean it's going to get through the courts or there's going to be any impact. I do think, though, we have to have that discussion and continue to have it about how we make our elections safer and better. We need to tighten up, voter rolls. I do think that there should be rules that everybody knows ahead of time on how votes are counted, when they're counted, if they come in later, are they counted? I think that is, something that needs to be clarified, that everybody understands kind of the rules of the game. But you also have, Jenna Griswold out here criticizing anything that has to do with elections when it comes from the administration. But she's had some issues here, right? We talked about the passwords that were posted online. I think that there is plenty that we can work on to secure our elections, and that's what we need to focus on.
Andy, I want to hear from you on this. I mean, strategy-wise, why does he want to change it if it's been successful for him in the past?
Sure, because he is completely panicked about the 2026 election and midterm votes. And I think this is obvious. Obviously, Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution lays it out very clearly about how it's done. He's not going to change anything in Colorado, and he tends to sort of pontificate from that yellow chair in the Oval Office about what he's going to do. But despite the fact that he's obviously going to get clobbered in the 26th election, the Republican Party is, and it's because of performance. It's not just a back and forth like we normally see, but this is going to be especially dangerous for Republicans as they start to campaign and as they start to see where the votes are going to come from. So I think he's worried about it. I think the fact that, the Epstein stuff is still clogging up the system with him. And also, he hasn't really answered much about Russia and Ukraine and what's going to happen there and that solution. So I think he's been so much a failed president so far that 26 is going to show that he's really vulnerable. His party's vulnerable. And speaking from the Oval Office, I rarely hear a president talk partisanly like he has. And so he obviously has partisan agenda items at stake here. He's not sure what to do. And so he's trying different things, including redistricting Texas and other things to try to calm down on 26. The reality is he's going to get clobbered.
A real quick follow-up to Michael's point. Do you think that there do need to be some changes to the way elections work and tightening some things up?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think there's also all kinds of opportunities to make sure things are tighter. But Colorado has one of the safest and most secure elections in the country, and we're actually modeled with other states. They come see how we do it. So there's no leakage of significance in Colorado that we have talked about and know about. And nationally, there have been investigations. In fact, there have been a total of 712 investigations since the 2016 election on how fair or unfair it was, and we have found very little disruption in how it was done. We found here and there voter rolls may have dead people on, but here and there need to be cleaned up. But overall, the election system is whole, it's complete, it can always stand clearer clarifications on things, but it is fine as is.
All right, let's move on to another topic. So the president is eyeing another change here in Colorado, this time having to do with Tina Peters. We've talked about her quite a bit. Well, he posted on Truth Social demanding the former Mesa County clerk, who was sentenced to 9 years in prison for her role in allowing unauthorized access to voting machines. He said that if she is not released, quote, I am going to take harsh measures. That is part of this longer post that he made on Truth Social. Michael, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think that means, and is doing something to Colorado in this case within his presidential powers?
Yes, I don't know what it means specifically. I think this is Trump's opinion. Obviously, he has an opinion about Tina Peters. The thing here, though, is that there's no role for the federal government again, right? That this is a state law that she broke. It is a state policy. Basically, you had a Republican DA and then a jury of your peers in Mesa County, which is largely Republican area, who convicted her. And so there's no pardon that the president can do or anything like that. And so I think this is his opinion. I do think that there are some things, you read something like this, but then you watch earlier in the week, they had something about immigration and said, look, we're going to do lawsuits. We're going to come after you if you don't comply or if you prevent us from doing our job. And I think those are more legitimate, that they can come in and cut funding, et cetera. But I think in this case, there's nothing that's really going to come from this Tina Peters case. I think he was more sharing his opinion. Andy,
I want to hear from you on this. What do you think he means by what he said about Colorado being harsh to Colorado?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, but to Michael's point earlier, Michael, I've heard him say that Tina Peters is a criminal. She should be in jail, and she should be in jail, and that's where she should remain. And I do think he's sharing an opinion here. I also think these sort of petulant child threats, like I'm going to come down on you, or I'm going to have harsh maneuvers done to Colorado if this isn't done. I think part of what's going on here is we have somebody who is so not able to rise to the level of the presidency that we have these kind of comments like, if you don't do this, then this. It's almost like a child being warned by his or her father or mother of some reaction or punishment, and it doesn't make any logical sense. He has no control over that. Tina Peters is a criminal, has been admitted by the Republicans sitting at this desk, and I think that she's remained in jail, and there doesn't seem to be much difference here. I don't understand what he's worried about.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's talk about another topic. So state lawmakers are back in special session this week to try and fix a gaping budget gap. Now, we're not going to talk about that because there's way too many moving parts and we're not going to know what happens before this show airs. But they do need to cut about $700 million, and a Democratic lawmaker from the Western Slope now wants to pause wolf reintroduction to try and save some of that money. Now, that was a measure, if you remember, voters passed into law. So I want to hear from each of you. Andy, I'll start with you on this one. Is this something that should be on the chopping block, even though it's something voters would not get a say in repealing?
Right. So, first of all, I have great affection for the fact that lawmakers are back in special session. They don't want to be, and they're back there trying to solve a budget gap. And that's one thing. I also applaud the legislator, particularly for trying to find a budget opportunity. It's a meager shortfall, though. It's really not going to make that much of a difference. And actually, the voter sentiment goes the other way. So I actually don't think this is going to get touched. I think what he's trying to do is trying to figure out a way to save some money. It's roughly, about $1 billion. We're in the hole. It's not going to really make that much of a difference whether or not the wolves are reintroduced or not. And I would ask really that we look at serious opportunities to cut some money and also raise some revenue during this time.
What are your thoughts, Michael, on the argument that money is just a drop in the bucket?
Well, sure, it is a drop in the bucket, but I think everything should be looked at. This is interesting because it is a Democratic bill. This is, a legislator who lives in this area where this is being impacted. I do think you have to look at what voters do, and they have followed through with introducing wolves. But what people didn't vote for is mismanaging it, and that's what's happened. They didn't vote, to take the worst wolves from Oregon and bring them over here to kill cattle. They didn't vote to continue this spending, and so I think it is relevant. And when you're looking at a budget, to look at everything, and I think this is a big deal in that part of the state especially, and it's going to continue to be a big deal when you have 7 out of the 25 wolves dying this year. There's something that's going wrong. So I think we have to do what the voters want, but we have to do it in a really good way, and that hasn't happened. We've mismanaged this. So I think the fact that we're talking about it, that they're talking about it at the Capitol, is a good thing.
And next week, I'm sure we'll be talking all about what happened in special session. Thank you both for the conversation. Coming up, a Colorado law is at the center of a new legal debate that is making its way all the way to the Supreme Court. We'll talk about it. The state of Colorado is getting ready to head to the U.S. Supreme Court for a first-of-its-kind First Amendment issue. Colorado has banned conversion therapy for minors since 2019, but now a Colorado Springs-based counselor is asking the High Court to overturn it, arguing what's said in a doctor's office is protected.
Colorado is one of 25 states where lawmakers have banned a form of counseling for kids and teens called conversion therapy.
Someone who's gay, someone who's a lesbian, being told that what you believe you are is wrong and trying to change who you are, who you love. That is the so-called gay conversion practice that is now discredited.
Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser will defend the state before the U.S. Supreme Court in October. On the other side of the argument is a counselor from Colorado Springs named Kaylee Childs. In her brief to the High Court, she questions whether Colorado's law censors conversations between counselors and their clients to the point of violating the free speech clause in the Constitution.
There's never been a First Amendment objection to protecting patients and prohibiting substandard of care, regardless of whether or not the care is carried out through words.
He says counselors can legally tell patients about conversion therapy, but they cannot practice it.
The only thing the law addresses is prohibiting therapists from providing substandard care that would seek to change a patient's sexual orientation or gender identity.
The Supreme Court has a 6-3 conservative majority. Weiser says the right-leaning justices may not be open to Colorado's argument at first, but he hopes to change their minds.
In theory, when you talk about being conservative, it means you preserve what is long established and you view change as something that should be done cautiously. In that sense, we have a conservative case to be made.
A case he says could have far-reaching consequences if it fails.
You would destabilize and you would undermine all sorts of malpractice regimes or licensing regimes where there is any speech or conversation.
Oral arguments are scheduled for October. Well, thanks for joining in on the conversation. For Colorado Point of View, I'm Ashley Michaels, and we will see you right back here next week.